All my life, I have listened to politicians, as little as possible, mind you, but I've listened to them repeat the same things. In every country, you'll find the same thing. In Britain and Canada is the same, and the States as well. Oh my goodness, you pay into the Social Security thing, pay into it for pensions, and pay. And then they tell you, and newspapers, they used to tell you in papers a little bit more. They don't tell you anything today except nonsense and who's having sex with whom in Hollywood. And they call that news. That's intentional too. That's the new form of news, which is nonsense. Doesn't make any difference to your life. But getting back to what I'm saying, they used to give you actual, almost like debates, in fact, in the newspapers, to at least encourage people to think. And that's awfully important. You don't get that today. You're told what to think. You're not encouraged to come to a decision. Here's what you think, that's it. And if you don't think this, you're bad. That's another part of the Pavlovian training today too. But they used to tell you, oh, the government's bringing all this money in for pensions, but there's nothing in the kitty because they spend it all in other things as soon as the money comes in. Every country has had the same stories for years and years and years. And it never dawns on the people. It really doesn't dawn on them. That it's not just corruption. It's not just intentional political maneuvering and chronology. It doesn't dawn on the people that it's planned this way. It was never planned that you end up getting a pension. They've got it worked out in centuries, for goodness sake. The agenda for the 21st century. This is what we're in now. Agenda 21. The whole of the century, the 2030 is only part of it in blocks, you see. But it's a whole century thing. Just like the whole century, the 20th century was done in blocks. It's like a big business plan. Oh, but before 1914's over, we better get a war started. Oh, we'll start a second one if they've not given up their sovereignty by around 1939 in Europe. Oh, we'll have a Korean War after that. Oh, we'll have a Vietnam War after that, And it's still going on. And the neocons too is all across the Middle East for it, because they've got other things to gain for themselves. And that's what you're living through. A long-term planning. You don't suddenly get spontaneous wars. It doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. I can remember when I was really small, watching occasional, not too bad documentary from the BBC in the old days. And even when they were misleading you, because often put out truth and then mislead you with the rest of the conclusion, they would show you, for instance, disarmament. And they go through little bits on documentaries about the United Nations and the League of Nations before it, and Britain signed on to disarmament after World War I. And you'll see the ships at sea just dumping cases and boatloads of rifles and everything else and ammunition and so on and so on and so on. The big manufacturers are sitting back laughing up their sleeves because now they know when they start another war, Britain's going to have to literally go to them, to the bankers, and then borrow like crazy and then buy all their manufacturing stuff for the war. Rebuy it all. Which is exactly what happened. That wasn't an accident. It wasn't accidental. And people are so nice. People are nice. We're trained to be nice. Because we're social creatures. And social creatures tend to be sociable creatures, except for the psychopaths who are awfully good at pretending to be sociable, but they're sharks, really. But most folks are really sociable. And you don't want to rip folk off and hurt folk and so on. Often we can do that in little ways. We don't really do it intentionally, hopefully. But at the same time, we're awfully good. We're trained to be naive. And the big boys at the top couldn't exist in the way that they do with their system unless we were naive. That's why they make sure we stay that way. All the excuses we've been given for so long are beyond paper thin today. They're very transparent. And they continue with it all. Eugenics. Bring down the world's population. Profit from it at the same time. I've gone through the talks on that too, to do with all energy and technocracy and everything else that came out back in the 30s, early 30s. and how they would eventually bring in credits, like Bertrand Russell said. And I've noticed that in some recent documentaries. Folk have been going through my stuff and really putting it all in and doing good jobs of it. But Bertrand Russell said that eventually we could replace wages even and money with credits the government would allocate. And it's no coincidence that just recently I've noticed they talk about a mandatory wage for everybody. The government will just dish out, working or not, doesn't matter, because everyone can't get a job anymore. That's the plan. See, you don't get a job anymore. It's all in China. Therefore, they're going to give you basic sort of wage to stay at home. So back to Bertrand Russell again, when he talked about it, and he said the government could issue people credits right into their bank accounts. And so there's that dualistic thing too of true socialistic fascism, for those who haven't figured it out. And the communism is socialism, which is fascism. It's all the same thing. The government will work with the banks, of course, and deposit this basic income right into the bank for you, and credits. And Russell said that, and this is going to come, this is coming. You can tell it in some real socialistic countries, with the statements they're making today of how you will behave, and you better behave, and here's what you better believe, and etc. And what you see in front of you isn't what you think you see. Here's what you better see, or else, and stuff like that. Bertrand Russell said that these credits will be put in, for instance, every week, or it could be every 2 weeks, into the bank for you under your name. And you had to use them before the next income of that came into the bank account. Because if you didn't, they would disappear. That way you couldn't save them up and become wealthy. Only those at the top, the better people who come out of special wombs, who run it all, will be able to live in a high, luxurious lifestyle, because they deserve it, you understand? Just like the Bolsheviks and communists in the Soviet Union that flooded into that country from outside, lived awfully well for 70-odd years off the backs of the people. And they had their country homes and everything else, and their servants, and yada, yada, yada. Well, it's just natural, isn't it? Those who rule you should live in the life of Riley, basically. And of course, they train you too to think that that's how it should be. and it's the same old thing that you did with royalty. Well, the royalty deserves to live in those big castles that we build and pay for and all that stuff. Because they're special, they're closer to God than you are. And nothing changes. Nothing. I don't care if it's atheistic society or whatever they want to call it. It's all the same human behaviour that they use and utilise and use against you, actually. So here you are in a technocratic society. And Russell also said that failure to comply with your government's demands on social problems, meaning opinions, beliefs and all that stuff, failure to comply will mean the hold up of your credits in the bank. So if you have to pay rent and so on, which you will, because eventually in Agenda 21, eventually you're going to do with all private property. Well, not all, again, for all the masses of people. Then you won't pay all your rent. They'll punish you by withholding it until you get on your knees and say, I'm very, very sorry. I thought I saw something in front of my eyes, but I was awfully mistaken. It was something else. And then you say, what was it called again? Okay, because they're always giving you new names for things. And that's what's going to happen. And they call it a better, kinder society, because they use psychology to make you go along with it. And you don't even know you're doing it at times. As I said, look at Facebook. You all literally think that was set up by one guy, and you believe the genius story, because you believe all these genius stories. They're old hats at this genius stuff. And they're all fronts for big corporations working with intelligence services, and so are often they are part of the intelligence agencies. But yeah, they can be awfully appealing. Oh, look what you can get if you just join this. Then they know all about you. All about you. Oh, your daddy died of that. Oh, dear. And your uncle. Yep. And I'm telling you, once they've got everything worked out, and you get all credits put into your bank account and all that, and your PC updates come along to you, are you going along with this? What do you think? You'll say, oh, absolutely, you're right, boss. But I'll tell you, if you make a mistake, that's you. Then you're bad. You're bad. Everyone believes this today, and you should too. You're bad. And they've got a whole bunch of things to make you feel really wrong. Because that's a scientific control of the mind for society, for the whole planet, actually. And don't think that they're going to let certain groups off with it like Muslims. Of course they're not. They're using the Muslims right now to destroy what's left of all the European society. by mass immigration. They always know. This is not news to sociologists. They know that mass immigration means that they won't integrate. They'll simply create their own areas until they breed the rest out. That's just the way it's planned out. And they're talking about it openly. There's no guessing here about it. That's what's planned. But then they work on them after that's done. And then they start socializing them through all their TV movies and BBC documentaries until in 30, 40 years or more, they'll have them docile and compliant like everybody else too. And if you're not, again, you won't get on your little freebies and things. Everything's been planned this way. And you are living through a massive plan. Massive plan. Do you think one single soldier would have left, for instance, the UK to go and fight anybody at the beginning of World War II? Do you really think so? If there hadn't been massive preparation in advance for it? Winston Churchill was way up on it too. So was the Americans. They were up on it, it was all planned, etc. The general public weren't. But you think they're going off to fight if they knew that once they came back, their government was going to work, and regardless of the party. Remember what Carl Quigley said, the leaders are always belong to the same group. They're pre-picked. So as soon as they came back, they didn't know it too. The king and the elites and the globalists and the Julian Huxleys had their world meetings for depopulating Britain, starting there and going on. Because they said not enough folk had died in the 2 world wars. Thank you very much for going off and doing this. But no, and then if they knew that they were going to open the borders bit by bits and create subdivisions in different areas for different peoples, until eventually you wouldn't even be welcome walking in those areas anymore. Do you think anyone would have gone and fought for anything? Of course they wouldn't. Of course they wouldn't. And that's why you're always lied to, because they want you to go off and do this and do that and bring in this globalistic system. And you're going down the tubes as you do it. You don't know that, but you are. That's what the League of Nations was about. And that's what the United Nations is about as well. It's quite amazing to watch what's happening. It really is. But there's never been a time, and now they're really pushing hard and fast, because there's never been a time when people have so much entertainment, fairly cheap, on their high-definition televisions and so many channels to watch. And then they go on the internet and get lost forever. Just following every suggestion that Google pops up for you to follow until the day's passed and you've learned nothing. Or if you started with a good intention to investigate something, it's taking you off the track into 1,000 different byways until whatever you've watched all day has been pretty well useless to you. That's not unintentional. That's part of managing your day, your mind, and everything else, and your opinions, ultimately. The real observations you get in life are not going to come out of governments. It's your own observations that matter. That's why it was always so important to know elderly people when you're growing up. And you could go in those days and question them and have a chat with them and so on. And eyewitnesses, people who lived through things, people who went off and did all the fighting and all these crazy things that they thought were going to help people, only to witness what really happened afterwards. That's true eyewitnesses. Not these glossy, oh, here's the Spitfires and here's the blah, blah, blah that went off to kill whoever. And that's where your information came from. And you won't find that now. Because those old generations didn't sit and watch TV 24 hours a day and play on the internet and get lost. And they didn't go along with the political correct indoctrination that they still tried to do back then too. The people used to have debates in the streets. I can remember it. The older guys, even old miners in Britain, around, and then miners actually were awfully well up on things, and they would chat about all the things that were happening in politics and the pros and cons, and they were sharp, these guys. They knew the cons went on, but they debate. You don't see that anymore. You don't hear it. Anybody. All you get is bits and bytes as a Twitter to each other, like little birds. It's sad, isn't it, how totally managed we all are with their psychologists and the neuroscientists and all the rest of it. But again, it's no surprise because many publications, and I've read lots of them again over there, from the big foundations and their big think tanks. They said they'd bring us all to the stage and beyond. And they're still going at it, of course, big time now. Quite some. Now, before I ramble off in different tangents, getting back to what I said at the beginning, of how things are planned way in advance. And how they talked about, years and years ago, 40, 50 years ago, more, that the money that people would be made to pay in for Social Security and so on, from their wages, eventually they wouldn't get them at all, because the government was using it all as it came in for other projects. Well, now you're at the end of it now, you see, and it's time they started bringing you down, your population down big time. And they've been doing it for quite a few years, actually. This is not happening by chance. The do-gooders and the nice folk, the really, really nice people would say they'd never do that. Yes, they would. These are the same politicians and so on, and the groups above the politicians that really run the show on behalf of their masters, which is not the electorate, by the way. They're in total control of what is happening today. It's planned this way. Of course it is. They can't keep writing about what they want for 70-odd years and always getting what they want in steps that they put out to you. You can't win that many lottos. It's planned that way. Here's an article going back to 2015. Health officials in Britain put an alert at the time. It says the health officials are currently investigating a significant decline in life expectancy across the country. Significant. The email sent to the Public Health England by Darwin Council's Director of Public Health, Dominic Harrison, said the Council has seen a sustained reduction in life expectancy. And that's extremely, extremely unusual. The figure suggests, for instance, a woman's life expectancy, which stood at 85, has fallen in recent years. The email sent before Christmas and seen by the Health Service Journal said, in Blackburn and Darwin, there have been reductions for both men and women, as well as some signs of reduction in life expectancy for men at 65. By the way, that's one of the big ones. The men are all dying off with cancers, mainly prostate and so on. Right on the button. I mean, there's good planning for you, good science, eh? How did it get into them? Well, you're taking it through your food, but you've also been primed with inoculations. I'm pretty certain of it. That's what it has to be. I've known guys, I've mentioned it this year too, who just dropped dead or come down very quickly with cancers, right at the button, right when they're ready to get their pensions. Well, guess what? They won't get any pension, they'll be dead and gone, and the government laughs up their sleeve because they've already spent it on other things. Anyway, the email was described as an alert and calls for a national review to analyse the causes and developing local national recovery plans. Like they don't know, eh? That's a mystery. And speaking to RT, the health policy expert and founding partner at Inclusive Health, Mike Bristwhistle, said, the reasons for the decline are complex. We need to improve the way we support older people who have complex needs. The folk are becoming crippled before they're retired, with other diseases too. Accelerated aging diseases. That's what they're getting. You've got youngsters now. You've got juvenile arthritis, for goodness sake. These are aging diseases. According to the Office for National Statistics, death rates in the UK in 2013 increased by 1.5% in the previous year. The most common reason for those deaths was cancer. Some 29% of registered deaths were linked to the disease. Macmillan Cancer Support confirmed that 3/4 of newly diagnosed cancers occur in people aged 60 or over. They say living an unhealthy, it's always your fault, right? Unhealthy lifestyle will rapidly increase the risk of developing the disease. And then they go on about, you got to work in a better and get living better lifestyle and so on to live longer. Well, you need good accommodation, healthy accommodation to live longer. They know all this stuff, for goodness sake. When I was wee, a whole generation, well, almost a whole generation, was crammed into emergency housing because the governments had promised the people a lot more housing, like council housing, paid for by the people, mind you, if they fought more wars, like World War II and so on. And they'd only built partial housing or amount of housing for after World War I, which they promised the same thing. You often get slaughtered, and we'll build houses for those that survive. And World War II comes along, and there still was a short. So the same cry went out again. We'll build you. You always get these little carrots. So you need good health and accommodation, and you need good food, and we're not getting that either. I was looking back today at some old pictures of towns in Scotland. Old, not that old, but the age where I was born into and so on. And you should see the conditions that lots of folk had to live in. And you see the children, and they're like something from the 1800s, some of them. The way they're dressed and all the rest of it. Rather sad. That was Great Britain, for goodness sake. Well, a few folk certainly live greatly, but not the majority of the people. Nothing really changes, eh? Now they give you the appearance, well, you got better accommodation today and better housing and lots of food. It's all junk and poison, but it's lots of food, etc., etc. Anyway, shadow health. And most folk can't afford to buy all what's called organic food. Organic food used to be called normal food. That was normal food, with all the different pesticides and herbicides in it, and didn't have the GMO and all that. That was normal food. Now the folk can't afford the normal food, but the wealthy can. Shadow Health Secretary Andy Burnham believes people in the UK need to take more care of them. So it's all your fault. Whatever happens, it's always your fault. And be responsible for their own health. They announced plans Thursday with the aim of getting half the country to live a more active. So it's this to do with active lifestyles. This stuff has been rehashed so many times over my whole lifetime, this nonsense. And Russia too had a life expectancy problem. I'll put that link up too. And then this article here too was to do with Americans retiring later and dying sooner, and they're sicker in between. The US retirement age is rising as the government pushes it higher and workers stay in careers longer. The folk can't afford to retire now. But lifespans aren't necessarily extending to offer equal time on the beach. Data released last week suggests Americans' health is declining, and millions of middle-aged workers face the prospect of shorter and less active retirements than their parents enjoyed. Then they give you the statistics. They have age-adjusted mortality rates, a measure of the number of deaths per year, and it rose 1.2% from 2014 to 15, according to the Society of Actuaries. That's the first year-over-year increase since 2005, and only the second rise greater than 1% since 1980. At the same time, Americans' life expectancy is stalling. Public policy and career track mean millions of US workers are waiting longer to call it quits. So they're working beyond retirement age. Almost 1 in 3 Americans aged 65 to 69 is still working, along with almost 1 in 5 in their early 70s. Postponing retirement can make financial sense because extending careers can make it possible to afford retirements that last past age 90 or even 100. But a study out this month adds some caution to the calculation. Americans in their late 50s already have more serious health problems than people at the same age did 10 to 15 years ago, according to Journal Health Affairs. Then they go into it and so on and so on. It won't matter, it's always your fault. Everything's always your fault. Good, the weather changes, it's your fault. Everything's your fault. That's the con, of course. Here's an article here too, to do with, and I've read it before, years ago, but so again, a weed killer is increasingly showing up in people's bodies. And it says, latest study to look at long-term effects of Roundup. For instance, Roundup is one. A popular weed killer developed by Monsanto in the 1970s raises questions about the herbicide's possible contributions to poor health in certain communities. The study was published today in JAMA, and the link is, I'll put it up to track people over the age of 50 in Southern California from 1993 to 1996, and then to 2014 to 2016, with researchers periodically collecting urine samples during that time. Researchers led by Paul Mills, Professor of Family Medicine and Public Health at University of California, San Diego, found the percentage of people who tested positive for a chemical called glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in the herbicide Roundup, shot up by 500% in that time period. The levels of glyphosate also spiked by 1,208% during that time. Exactly what that means for human health isn't quite clear yet. Well, that's nonsense, of course, you know. There are a few studies. No, there's not. They've done lots. We're always being studied quietly, mind you. But oh yeah, and all the data from your blood tests are always getting sent off to centralized authorities and governments and so on. But the claim here is few studies of the chemical and its effects on people. What a joke. Although animal studies raise some concerns. One half from the UK, in which rats were fed low levels of glyphosate throughout their lives, found that the chemical contributed to a higher risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Lots of children now, youngsters, have fatty liver disease, regardless of their diet. And I know this from people who are in touch with me who actually are surgeons who, as they call it, harvest organs. That's their profession. They harvest the organs. And they've been telling me, you know, that's what they're finding. More and more and more of this. It's very common now. Fatty livers. So it says, a condition in which the fat accumulates in the liver and contributes to inflammation and scarring of the tissue. Mills says that the levels of glyphosate documented in the people in his study were 100-fold greater than those in their rats. To follow up on these results, Mills plans to measure factors that track liver disease to see if the levels of glyphosate he found are actually associated with a greater risk of liver problems in people. Of course it is. Anyway, he heads the Herbicide Awareness and Research Project at UCSD, an ongoing research project in which he invites people to provide urine samples to test glyphosate levels, and so on and so on and so on. For now, he says the findings should make the people more aware of what they're ingesting along with their food. Now, I've read articles years ago too where they keep testing every year women who are pregnant, for instance, and they find it, and then have children, and they find it in their breast milk. They've found it in amniotic fluid. They find it everywhere, this stuff. It's not supposed to be. Anything that's not supposed to be there in nature is dangerous to you. We know that, like radiation. Occasional politician that was just a figurehead, really. But the real technocrats, the management class, would be taking care of the world managers, and you'd be trained just to accept that and leave it to them. It's too complex for you to understand. Well, that's what we're living through today. But we still have it in our heads. Well, these big managers and these special folk who come out of special wombs, and some of them wear white coats too, they would never do anything to harm you. They're holier than you, don't you know? They're holy. They've been to universities and got lovely degrees and stuff, and they understand what does what. And even though the stuff is oozing out your pores that you're consuming, they tell you not to worry about it. Don't worry about it. And if you say it's killing, it's not doing that. No, those rats we tested that stuff. They were all defective, you know. These rats. And on it goes. And I always go back to some of the rather more blatant people in history. Blatant in what they thought about the general population. Now, it's time we shook ourselves from this lethargy, this almost lethargic amnesia we have, that people in the world are really nasty, those who seek power. They tend to be rather brutal people. And that'll never change, by the way. Never change. It doesn't matter if they come in with a smile or showing their teeth in a big frown, that they're rather brutal people. And that's what history always shows you. And you should believe that you got to think for yourself and make your own decision, and then really take action. And while you still have a chance to make your voice heard, because shortly you won't have any chance at all to make your voice heard. You might prattle away in your little tweets and that to authorize websites that just put it all into the garbage bin. But that's as far as it will go. And eventually that'll be outlawed too. You're a bad person. You complain about your wonderful. In fact, that's the term they used quite a few years back in the 90s. They came out with it I think they borrowed it from some of the Soviet countries. If you complained about the system in the Soviet country, you were labeled mentally ill. And you could actually get put in a psychiatric hospital or prison because you had inflexibility of opinion. And that was what they classified disease as. And they would forcibly drug you and all the rest of it and call you mentally. You had to be mentally ill to criticize a utopia, the workers' utopia of the Soviet system. This wonderful Marxian utopia. Obviously you were mentally ill. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever forget. It doesn't matter what term, it's always the same format that they use. And they will, just like the Soviet system, they'll turn around to the neighbors in the street who are all petrified and say, well, look at these, are you all unhappy with this system? And they go, oh no, the guy's obviously crazy. Yeah. That will be repeated over and over and over again. That's how people react. They're terrified. And they won't stand up for you. Especially once you let go of that ability to even get together and stand. I can remember back in Scotland, when certain things happened and people literally got together, not like a mob to go and to bash windows or smash windows, but they would go, and including to the schools, and make their mind heard immediately. And no, they weren't put off either and say, I'll come back tomorrow. That was that, I'm telling you. Anything wrong, that's how it used to be. And that's how it's supposed to be. Then you tell all those folk who are living off of you, your tax money, that they're employees. And you're being trained right now to forget all that. And most folk have already forgotten it. And that's awfully sad.